let me get my questions. We have, oh, looks like people have found their way here. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so my friends, I'm not sure how to designate speaking order. I would love you guys to introduce yourselves and to talk a little bit about your work. Can we start with Mary?
Sure. And I kind of want to apologize. I'm in the server closet at where I work because I work from home and I work remotely and I live where there's satellite internet. So I came into town to get some good internet. So I apologize for the not pretty background. My name is Mary Kit Kailstow, and I write fantasy, science fiction, and women's lit and romance, kind of all across the board, mostly magic realism. And my women's lit and romance has an equestrian theme. And I do that in conjunction. I also run Epona Author Services, where I do editing, formatting, and techie, geeky website work.
That's an excellent name for a company, I have to say.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate that wholeheartedly. Jasmine, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I am Jasmine Gower. I am pronoun indifferent, so she, he, they, it's all good. I am a fantasy author and freelance editor. That's about what I got going on right now.
It's kind of a hard question to answer, like in the circumstances,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's still an excellent answer. Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole, she, her pronouns, and I write both nonfiction and fiction, mostly realistic. Yeah, and I'm really bad at talking about myself.
Did someone warn you that that was this whole panel?
That is this whole panel, yes. I'm doing it though. It's happening.
You can do it. So I have some questions prepared, and in the second half, we're going to see if attendees have some questions. Someone is saying a thing in chat. Jennifer, we can't see you. Jennifer, are we supposed to be able to?
I can see the message from Jennifer.
Yes.
I don't know if that's what they're asking.
Okay, so we are, oh, Zoom, please calm down. We are going to move on to some of my questions, like I was saying, and then in the second half, we'll have attendee questions. Oh, Caroline made it.
Hi, sorry.
That's totally cool. Did you want to give us your introduction?
Okay, what did everyone else say?
If you could give us your name, your preferred pronouns, and also whatever you're working on.
Okay, so my name is Caroline Logan. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and I'm currently working on the third novel of the Four Treasure series. So the second one's coming out in October.
That's fantastic. You have a release coming out? That's so cool. Okay, so I was just explaining the setup of the panel. I'm gonna ask you guys some questions. In the second half, we're gonna go to attendee questions. If all of the attendees are asleep and don't have any questions, I do have some extras. But it is pretty early in the morning where I am, so if everyone's sleeping, I'll forgive them. So.
Same for me.
It's like, Diana, how could you do this to us? So, the first question is going to be the most basic, and is, what are the kinds of hurdles that you face as creative people dealing with anxiety? What are the struggles that you experience? And we will go in reverse order maybe this time, so everybody gets a chance to go first and last. Carolyn, did you want to go first?
Oh, someone else. Sorry, I'm still getting myself like into the
Nicole?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges for me, I think, is, trying to get myself in the right frame of mind that, isn't, especially right now, there's so much going on in the world to compound with, personal anxiety. There's also political anxiety, and there's, just anxiety about the state of the world. And so I think just getting myself into the state of mind where I can kind of put that aside for a moment because it's also important, is I think one of the biggest challenges for me.
That is kind of a huge deal because it's not just internal anxiety. There are, like you said, very important things in the world that we have to deal with, and you
Yeah.
still want to write at the same time. So that would be a huge deal. Jasmine?
I would say for me, it's energy management. I feel like I'm going to probably repeat a lot of what I say on the Writing with Depression panel tomorrow, because I'm on that too. But with my anxiety and depression, it just takes a lot of energy out of me from kind of both ends, being depressed and also being anxious about everything. So I'm always kind of constantly vibrating a little bit, and that just wears you down. And then having the energy to write and to just parcel out that kind of mental energy to do the work that I want to do is really difficult, and keeping a kind of balance to make sure that I can get done the things I want to do is really challenging.
It's very tough when your anxiety is also drawing from your very limited energy pool,
Yeah.
right? You're like, if I could not have this, I could have slightly more energy, but it's not
Yeah.
enough. Mary?
So probably for me, my biggest challenge is believing that other people want to read what I write, because especially my women's literature, I describe my writing as barn books for those of us horse crazy kids that are now horse crazy old ladies. And so it's very personal to me, and I write the stories that I want to read. And so, yeah, for me, it's not so much the actual writing, because that's my happy place, but it's rather everything else around the writing. Do people want to read it? Do I suck? Does nobody not want to tell me I suck? All of that, joyful anxiety that we writers have in general anyway.
Just slightly exaggerated because of the circumstance.
Yes.
Carolyn, do you have an answer for us?
Yeah, so I think that I totally agree with Mary that writing is my happy place. But it's kind of the same thing with everyone else. I think it's the feeling that your energy is depleted because of anxiety. I'm a teacher as well, so when I'm kind of going to work and there's kind of anxiety around that, then you're trying to come home and write, and it's just so exhausting sometimes.
Especially in your circumstance, like that's a whole additional set of issues.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons I asked that question is hopefully so that the people attending can see some of their struggles in what you guys are doing, which sets us up for what are your methods for coping with these specific problems? What are the things that you find help you the most? And we can't go backwards or forwards this time because we're gonna end up repeating ourselves. Nicole, did you want to go first?
Someone else can go. I went first last time. Someone else can go first.
Jasmine.
Yeah, so I think this probably sounds like a really obvious answer, but I really grew up in an environment that was pretty hostile towards mental illness. So I was pretty far into my 20s by the time I started seeking like actual medical help for my depression and anxiety. And that has really helped a lot with managing my energy levels. It's still really hard because the world is kind of falling apart around us. So that there's that aspect to it that's hard to manage, but the kind of internal chemistry I've gotten a lot more under control once I started seeing doctors about it and getting some medications that worked for me. And that has really allowed me to kind of to budget out my energy in a way that works better for my writing schedule. So again, kind of an obvious answer, but just getting medical help is a great first step a lot of the time.
You say it's an obvious answer, but it is something a lot of people struggle with. So I think it's really
yeah.
important to say it.
Yeah, and like now, to me in retrospect, it seems obvious, but when I was 26, which is still pretty old to be like, I've been dealing with this my whole life and haven't gotten any medical attention for it. It really didn't occur to me even to get help for it until it became just fully untenable. So I would recommend for anyone else, don't wait till it becomes fully untenable, because that's a really awful place to be in.
I think that's some pretty good advice, honestly. Caroline, did you want to give us the things that you use to deal with stuff?
Sure. Well, one of the pieces of writing advice that I think that you always hear is if you are not writing every day, then you're not a writer. And I think that especially if you have anxiety, but really anyone, that is just totally unrealistic. So if you feel like you've missed a day with writing, I think that's the point that most people say, right, I can't do it then. But maybe the next day you'll feel better, you'll feel like you have the energy to do it. Just, write down a few words, doesn't need to be a lot. But yeah, just don't give up because you feel like you're never going to get anywhere, because even one word is going to help towards your word goal. So yeah, don't put yourself down in that sort of sense.
That is an excellent thing to remember. I definitely agree, because it's so easy to fail at something once and then just to count yourself completely out. The mentality of just trying it again the next day, I think that's really important. I think that's really good advice. Nicole, we'll go back to you.
Yeah, I channel it into the writing. If I am feeling, particular anxiety about a certain thing, maybe that's just the thing I need to write about that day. Or the novel that I'm working on now and that I'm editing, it has a lot to do with mental health and characters coping with mental health. And, for me, that's been a great way to, deal with my own anxiety and related problems.
Absolutely. There's something like really cathartic about working something out on the page, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's totally a good thing for people to try, is to work through those things in their characters. Mary, it's your turn again.
So everybody has said such wonderful things, and I use them all myself as well. What I use also to help me is have a place where you write. For those of us who are writing as our happy place, make it a literal happy place. I have a she shed. And it overlooks the horses and the chickens, and that's my happy place. So that's when that door is shut, my husband knows, unless the house is on fire, don't bother me. And it is, I think having a designated place to write, to surround yourself with things that you like, burn a stick of incense if you can do that, or that helps you, and and that works for you. Music, movies, background noise, just make it as pleasant as possible.
I've heard, not only just for dealing with anxiety, but for getting people in the right mindset for creating anyways, that people give that advice a lot. So especially, I think, as a way to remove yourself from the stress of the outside world, that's got to be an excellent idea. So here is a slightly different question, and it is, how do you communicate your anxiety to other writers that you might network with, or to people in the home? How do you make yourselves understood? How do you make yourselves seen by the people who need to? Because I know it's really hard for a lot of people to express themselves in a way that leads to care. So we're going to try and tackle this very big question. Caroline, did you want to go first?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting about, well, I have the two careers, so one of them is teaching, one of them is writing. And while I can be a little bit open with anxiety, depression, etc., with teaching, you have to kind of keep that on the down low a lot of the time. Whereas with writing, it feels like there's more of a caring community. So if you are on Twitter and if you're in the writing community there, you'll see, thousands of people who are in the same boat as you that are also writers with anxiety or writers with depression. And I think it just is, it's good because it kind of creates this, I guess, network of people that are willing to kind of help you out and are to like lend a shoulder to cry on, etc. So I think that for writers, because we are maybe creative people, it is not as frowned upon as much as in other parts of society. But I definitely think that if you are if you want to be heard, if you want to let people know that you are having problems, just reach out to them. And it might be a case of reaching out to someone online that you actually don't know in real life, which might be easier. Or it might be that you can speak to another writer that you're friends with, or your agent, or your publisher, or whatever. So I think that in general, the writing community is pretty good at looking after each other.
You bring up the interesting point that sometimes it's easier to talk to somebody you're not super close to.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, like, the writing community on Twitter, generally speaking, is really open about that kind of stuff and usually pretty happy to help. So I think you're right, that's an excellent resource. Jasmine.
Well, I'm definitely the kind of person who uses humor and sarcasm to cope with things that I don't really feel comfortable talking about. So I make a lot of jokes about my mental illness, kind of as a way to just work through the feeling of it, but also to kind of communicate to other people. It's like, hey, I'm suffering internally always, but it's kind of funny and relatable. So a lot of people who have the same experiences are like, yeah, I get that. I know that feeling. So that's, I mean, in some ways it's kind of a way to not talk about like what I'm actually feeling sometimes, but in other ways it's really just a way to signal to other people who are in kind of the same boat as me. It's like, yeah, this is not, I'm not having an absolute mental health crisis at the moment, but I just kind of want to express how I'm feeling, and other people can, who have that feeling too, can recognize themselves in that, and we can kind of have a good chuckle about it.
Because if you don't laugh about it, what are you gonna do, right?
Exactly.
And your answer, like Caroline's answer, like highlights the need to be understood by people with similar struggles.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, you can use humor to do that because most people will understand those shorthands.
Yeah, and it's not, I mean, if you're having a really like a deep crisis that you need really immediate help for, that's not really a healthy coping mechanism. But if you're just, it's like, oh, I'm having kind of a bad day, everyone knows that feeling, right? And then people, on Twitter or in your writer groups or whoever you're communicating with is like, yeah, I've been there too. And it's kind of a moment of sharing between people who have similar experiences, and it just kind of makes it easier.
Yeah, not being alone, because isolating yourself emotionally, always, you just keep digging and digging, right? Like it just gets worse. That connection is so great. Mary?
Well, I feel very seen like that as somebody who isolates themselves.
I didn't mean to call you out in front of the class.
No, that's okay. But no, it's I've had to do this because it is my husband and I on 18 acres. I mean, it's us, and we each have our own unique little buttons, as we call them. And I just say, be honest. I will tell him, you know what, dude, I am having a very, I'm very anxious today. I've went through all my list, everything's fine. There's no meteors in the sky at the moment, but this is what's going on. And I just say blunt honesty sometimes works, because especially if you're dealing with somebody who is empathetic and who wants to help like a loved one, but doesn't quite get it. Sometimes being super duper blunt, like this is what's going on right now, I think helps as well. Not to dramatize it, but just to be, hey, look, this is where I'm at. And this is maybe what I need from you right now.
Because how can you expect them to respond if they don't know that information?
Right.
And for some people, it might be hard to be blunt like that, but I can definitely see why it would work. Nicole?
Yeah, so wanted to shout out Jasmine first because self-deprecating humor is my jam. But unlike Jasmine, I, grew up going to therapists and grew up knowing that I had mental health, problems, and it felt really isolating, not to know anyone else like me. And so in more recent years, I've started just kind of talking about it and, kind of saying, forget it. I'm just going to put it out there, and have had people reach out to me and say, I was dealing with similar things. People that I knew, when I first started going through everything, and, people have said, I was going through similar things, and it's really cool to know that someone else was as well. So it's really terrifying, but I've started just, being pretty open about it, like, oh, I'm feeling anxious today, and like I can't do this thing, and the people that I surround myself with tend to understand, and it's been really a surprising kind of result of that is people that I didn't know as well, or people that I wouldn't have suspected, have reached out to me and said, like, thank you for being open about this. So I guess just kind of shooting my stuff into the void, and I've had some pretty okay experiences that way.
So what I'm hearing is that there is a payoff to the terrifying ordeal of being known.
Yes. It's really scary to be, but I definitely saw other people kind of, talking openly about their mental health before I did. I don't think I could have been the first, but definitely was among the first for some other people who hadn't really had someone talk about it openly before.
But what an excellent thing to be, to help them get there.
Yeah, it's really scary, but I'm proud of myself for it, honestly. So
that is excellent. Those are all some really good things to try. So along the same lines of how to be understood by others, how to be supported by others, what are the things that other people in your network, your friends, your family, your writing community, what are the things that those people can do to help? What are the kind of support that you need, that you like? What are the things that other people do with or without you asking that are the biggest help to you? And I've forgotten entirely what order I've gone in asking questions, so I'm going to start with Mary, because Mary's on the top.
This is kind of a hard question for me as somebody who's been pretty isolated. But I think just knowing that they're out there, and this is more the writing community on Twitter, there's about a dozen people I can think of off the top of my head that I know that if I'm posting, things are very bad right now, that they will come, hug emojis, gifts, whatever, that they will come through for me and say, you're not alone. And I think that's probably the biggest thing, is a lot like with what Nicole was talking about, where people kind of are, coming back and saying, hey, thank you for sharing this. I think making sure that people know that they're not alone, no matter what they're going through.
A lot of people, I think, discount those kinds of small interactions. Like you see a post and you're like, oh, I don't know if I should, like, am I overstepping my bounds by, sending them a cute GIF or sending them some hearts? So it's nice to hear that even that can be appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
Jasmine?
Yeah, for me, I think the most helpful thing is when the people in my network and my life just kind of have patience with me when I'm having a hard time, and are able to kind of be flexible with what they expect from me and what I've committed to them, maybe in terms of writing, like things like moving deadlines around if necessary. My agent's really great about being there for that kind of thing. I'm represented by Laura Zatz, and she makes a point of really putting her authors first, their well-being as individual human beings, really before anything else. So she's just been a great support system for me professionally, being understanding of what my limitations are and kind of the ebbs and flows of how my mental illness affects my writing process. So that kind of thing is really just that basic accommodation of being like, yeah, I know you're having a hard time right now, so we'll try rearranging things that we're planning on having you do, or that we've asked you to do, that kind of thing.
Because you look at your own work record and you're like, oh, this should take me so many number of days. But if you
Yeah.
have slightly more bad days than you're expecting, suddenly that deadline is unreachable.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the kind of thing that affects anyone, if they have a family emergency or things come up in people's lives, and anxiety is just another one of those things, honestly. But some people really kind of have a hard time acknowledging that it's a recurring thing that sometimes pops up more often than really anyone would prefer. But it does that, so it's good. It's good when people are able to be understanding and flexible around that.
And I think that's some excellent framing, realizing that other people, even if they're not anxious, even if they don't deal with anxiety specifically, still have these extenuating circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just people dealing with anxiety. I think that's definitely an important thing to note. Caroline.
So I could joke and say all my family and friends should just buy my book because that would be really supportive.
But you wouldn't be
But
lying.
no. Actually, I'm indie published, so the two books that have come out or are coming out, they are with a really small Scottish publisher, and I don't have an agent, but they kind of act as that as well. And there's a kind of little network of us. I think maybe there's 12 authors that are kind of working with that publisher, and we call ourselves Clan and Cranachan because the publisher is Cranachan. And we have like our little WhatsApp group, and we're always, like sending messages to each other saying, oh, I'm on this panel, or I'm going to be here that day. Is anyone, going to be there as well? So I can see. Sometimes we go out for dinner as well. So they are a group of people for me that they don't really know my family. They don't know the people that I work with. They are just to do with writing, and we are kind of united in that one thing. And I think that each person has actually had their own, experience of mental health issues, whether that is themselves or with a family member. And I think that they're really good at kind of understanding, but also not making a big deal of things. Because sometimes when you say to someone, I'm not having a good day today, I don't know about anyone else, but family and friends can go, oh my God, what is going on? Like, are you okay? But they're quite good at going, are you okay? Okay, well, maybe this will cheer you up. They'll send you a picture of their cat or something. So I think having a little group is always really good to kind of deal with mental health issues or just stress in general.
And having people, like you said, who can understand when you say, oh, things aren't going well, that it's like a 3 or a 5 and not a 9. Like that's so important because you don't want to be overwhelmed by someone else's troubles.
Yeah.
I think that's excellent if you can find someone who has enough understanding and chill for that. Nicole?
Yeah, kind of going off of that, the thing that really means a lot to me is when someone just asks what I need. Kind of going along with Caroline, like sometimes it's not, full-blown anxiety. Sometimes it's just like, I'm feeling a little bit anxious about this thing. And so I have a really good friend who, I'll text her and say, I'm having trouble with this thing. And she's like, okay, do you need me to empathize with you? Do you need me to, come up with a solution? Do you need me to, we'll just like list? And I'm like, I just like really need you to hear me right now. Like coming up with a solution would not be helpful. And that just kind of like basic thing that she actually asks me what I need is just really helpful for me.
Because not every problem with anxiety can be solved, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So you don't need someone else to solve it for you, but you do want someone else to listen to you being anxious.
yeah, just, you know, let me ramble about this for a little bit and maybe I'll feel better after.
Yeah, and that's an excellent thing to consider for outside people who don't know how to help, is you can just ask.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, what can I do? That's excellent. We do have some questions from the audience. We have a question from Alexa. Alexa asks, what aspect of the writing process causes you the most anxiety, and do you use specific techniques to cope with them? So, give that a minute to simmer, and I'm going to pick on Jasmine first.
I think if anyone's ever been on my Twitter, they probably know that editing is the thing that really gets me the most. It's the part of writing that I love to complain about the most, and that's because it is the part that causes me the most anxiety. I'm not really sure why. It's just some part of my brain going back over the stuff I wrote before is just like, oh, now I have to really think about it. I don't know. I feel like I might have some not great ideas in there that I have to deal with now.
That's the struggle, right? Like re-encountering your own work and being like, is this going to be as bad as I feel it is?
Yeah.
Do you have anything that you do to make that like less awful?
I do find, and I think a lot of just general writing advice recommends this, but once you're done drafting something, just kind of setting it aside for a while, like sometimes even a couple of months, so that you kind of just forget about at least the details of what you wrote. So then when you go back, there's that kind of emotional distance between it, and you're not thinking of it so much as like, oh, I wrote this, and more just like, here's some words that I have to fix because they're bad.
Alexa would like to note that you also nailed their anxiety specifically with editing. Nicole?
For me, it's the after writing, you know, like the promotion and the, you know, once you have something tangible that you're trying to get out into the world. I am very shy and very introverted. And so, you know, when I published my first book, I was kind of very content to just let it sit there. And my editor and publisher was like, no, you need to, you know, go on podcasts and you need to do panels and you need to, you know, whatever. And so for me, the thing that really helps with that is making it important. Like this panel specifically is talking about anxiety, and like mental health is something that's really important to me. So, you know, for me, this is something that the, you know, the need to be a part of this conversation and to talk about mental health and to destigmatize it is more important to me than my anxiety about being on a panel. So that is something that I don't think would work for everyone, but has worked for me somewhat. So
But if it works for you,
yeah,
it'll work for somebody else.
That's the hope.
I think that's total legit advice. Do the things that you feel strongly about because you'll be able to push through. I think that's valid. Don't worry about it. Mary.
So I'm with Nicole. It's the whole marketing and promotion that gives me anxiety. And for me, it's because I've internalized things that other people have told me. So I am going to put the disclaimer out there that this may not be the healthiest way to get through it, but spite is awesome. Because, you know, so on one hand, I believe that I can do what I can do and that's what I can do. And so I promote to the best of my ability and try to learn more because that's my weak spot. But also I promote because, you know, I will persist. I will move forward in spite of what this person has told me. And
I already knew that you and I were kindred spirits. But this is just like nailed it. Please continue. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay. That was pretty much it. That, yeah, you know, don't underestimate, as a creative person, don't underestimate, you know, the power of spite, you know, whether you're killing off a character or promoting your book.
The desire to prove people wrong when they think less of us is very powerful. And I agree, tapping into that is like the way to get things done for sure. Caroline.
So when my first book came out, I'd been working on it for years, and I felt like when it came out, I was happy with it, and so I wasn't feeling that anxious or nervous about it coming out. But now I've written the sequel, and I was supposed to write it a year. I kind of made the deadline. That was all good. But now I am having those anxiety dreams of it being rubbish and people hating it. So it probably started about August, and it's every now and again they're working their way through. So I just, I get nervous about people reading it and not liking it. And I know that to a certain point, that's my job is done because I've written the book, I've edited it, and I can't do anything else with it. And I probably shouldn't really read reviews, but I do. So I just try and use like affirmations, I'll say to myself, you worked really hard on the book. You like people like the first one, so nothing's really changed, so hopefully they like the second one. That sort of thing. You just kind of like repeating it to yourself over and over again. And if you can manage to someone else in your life that will also do that for you, then that's really good. So my fiance will say, people like the book, they like the first one, etc. So it's always good to hear that from a second source, I think.
A lot of times I hear people like disparaging affirmations, but if your brain is the one telling you the terrible things, if you can teach it to say the nice things, like that is very helpful. So that's an excellent tactic, I think, both for dealing with that specific anxiety, which I'm going through right now too, by the way. But also just for things in general, like when your brain is telling you the bad things, you can make it say the nice things, even if it feels forced at first. I think that's a fantastic idea. Other questions? So here's one thing. What is one thing that you wish other writers who do not have anxiety, what is one thing that you wish they understood about the way you work, about your process, about the things that might be hard for you? We've talked a lot about how supportive and excellent the writing community can often be. So where is one place that you find other writers tend to fall short or to struggle when it comes to understanding or supporting you? We'll start with Nicole.
Yeah, I think for me, it's about like equality versus equity. Like, I get the sense that some writers without anxiety are like, well, I can do this and I can write every day and I can, promote myself and I can edit without these problems. So why can't you? And they're like expecting things to be equal when, like with anxiety, you're working at, a disadvantage to whatever degree that is. I think that we need to kind of help people without anxiety reframe their thinking to understand that it's not the same for us, if that makes sense.
There's a lot of one size fits all advice, especially on Twitter. So that's what comes to mind when you say that, and people have to respond with that with like, I mean, it must be nice to not have to deal with literally anything else, so you can use this one solution all the time.
Yes.
So yeah, I agree. The simple remembering that it doesn't work the same for everyone would go a long way. Caroline?
I think that it's quite interesting speaking to people that don't have anxiety, because they will say that they do or have had anxiety at some point, because they are not realizing that there's a difference between being anxious about something or feeling nervous about something at different points in your life and actually having an anxiety disorder. So having to deal with it day to day, it affects you. And I don't know if it's the same in the States, but here, if anxiety or depression or any other sort of mental illness is affecting your day-to-day life, then it is considered a disability. Not so much with the writing community I've had that problem, but definitely with teaching I have, and it kind of like crosses over, I guess. You know, people are just, that I've heard before, oh, just cheer up, or it'll be fine, don't worry about it. You know, because some people can do that, some people can't cheer up, and some people can just stop worrying or go and do something to calm down and they'll be fine. So yeah, I think it's just having some patience with people and realizing that everyone's anxiety is different. Some people are going to be worse than others, and to just be kind to each other.
Wouldn't it be amazing if when someone said, "Oh, don't worry about it," that you could just not worry about it?
Yeah, that would be great.
It's like, oh, I've never thought of that before. Like,
Mhm.
wouldn't it be nice? But definitely just the idea that people might need more time, right? Like people might need more patience, they might need a little more compassion. Um, that should not be so hard a thing to remember, but sometimes we do have to ask it of people. Jasmine?
Um, I don't know. I think I'll just second what Nicole and Carolyn said. I kind of just would like to see more understanding that the way that people work and the way that people write is not going to be the same from person to person, not just because of anxiety, but any other, myriad of reasons. And that one size fits all writing advice on Twitter, I would love to not ever see it again. It's not good. But I think it does really kind of create sort of toxic expectations too, for especially with less experienced writers. People are kind of just dipping their toes into it for the first time. It's like, oh, I have to write every day. I have to, outline this way. I have to draft this way. And that's just not realistic, both in terms of within everybody's means and in terms of that's not the only way to get things done.
Yeah, like it's not even specifically just about anxiety or mental illness. Like one size fits all advice just doesn't work for people.
Yeah.
People write and organize their writing in a lot of different ways, so it's very silly to be like there is a one thing. And you brought up specifically the danger to people starting writing, to beginners.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think oh no, I don't remember who mentioned it before, but a lot of writers starting out see that advice and are really kind of discouraged from writing at all, because they're like, well, I just can't do that. My mental health isn't in the place where I can write every day. And that's not the only way to do it. So I really would love to see the narrative be more geared towards, there are many different paths to the goals you're trying to achieve. And that's true for anyone, regardless of whether they have anxiety or not. There's just so many different ways to be a writer.
The writing everyday advice is so especially insidious, and I don't know
that
why
one. Yeah, that one in particular is my least favorite.
Why does it keep, like, people keep saying it?
Yeah.
Like that's never been true or right. Mary?
So everybody has said wonderful stuff, so I don't want to add too much, but I will say I wish they understood that mental health is just as valid as physical health. That it's yes, it is all in our head, because that happens to be where our brain was located. If our brains were in our butts, it would all be in our butts. But it's a chemical imbalance, and you wouldn't tell somebody with diabetes you just have to process sugar better. I mean, you wouldn't say that. And so it would be good if they understood that we can't just think happy, that it's not bad to speak about mental health, because it would be no different than somebody speaking about diabetes, or oh goodness, I tripped and broke my leg. You wouldn't, well, we all kind of know. So
But this is going to be posted, so it's a good thing to say. You said you were worried about like saying too much, but that is why you're here.
yes.
Absolutely, mental health, your brain is an organ, right? So if it's not working, like, is that not a physical health issue? Like, does it not deserve the same respect? I agree entirely. We don't have audience questions. Audience, you can ask questions. We're here to answer your questions. but someone did make a comment that I wanted to address about, let me see if I can find it in the thing. So someone asked if men do not get anxiety because they noticed that this panel was all ladies. I'm going to preface this by saying this panel is not all ladies. This panel is a bunch of people who either are ladies or kind of look like ladies. So even though most of us are not in a circumstance where we can speak on behalf of cis men, is there anything that you would like to say to address that, to encourage any of the men who might be watching this? I know a few of us here use different pronouns, do not identify as cis women, do not feel comfortable that way. So you don't have to answer this question. I'll understand if you feel like it's not your space to, but I'm going to give everyone the floor if you would like to say something to the other half of our audience. And I'll start with Nicole.
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, men, cis men, trans men, you know, people who identify as masculine do experience anxiety. And I do think that there is a stigma against mental illness in general and talking about it, but I think extra for men. And I think that, you know, that's really damaging. And, you know, I think it's kind of in the way that, you know, sexism affects everyone, and that, you know, women are, you know, if we're talking about how sexism works on a gender binary and how, you know, kind of women are expected to be more emotional and more, you know, and men aren't, that I think is a big reason why men might be less willing to talk about mental health. But that for anyone who is a man or masculine identifying watching this, that, you know, you're valid and your mental health problems are valid. And, you know, if you do speak out, you'll probably find that you're not the only one.
I definitely agree. Like, there's a definite bias against who gets to have these conversations and who doesn't. And I think that's an important thing to remember when you look at this panel and see what everyone looks like when we're sitting here.
I do also, sorry, I just also wanted to add to that, you know, we are all, I'm a very tan white person, but like we are all, you know, white or very pale. I don't want to like assume how other people identify, but that's also, you know, when we talk about mental health, it is also tends to be a very white conversation, and that, you know, people of color do also experience mental health problems, and a lot of those problems are tied to racism specifically. So, you know, just expanding those conversations to encompass different types of people, I think is important.
Absolutely. It is like there's bias in who receives care and in what kind of care they can find. And I think that's important to acknowledge. Caroline?
I think that something that has been kind of intrinsic with masculinity in the past is that I am not going to talk about my feelings, because if I talk about my feelings, I will not seem as masculine as someone else who's keeping quiet about it. And that's so dangerous. I've known quite a few people, men that have died because of anxiety and depression and other mental health issues, and we did not know. You know, we were pretty close, and it was just a total shock, like out of the blue, and it just felt like they were keeping it all inside and didn't want to talk about it. So, you know, this panel was it was voluntary, so we could say which panel we wanted to be part of. And I wonder if the stigma is still there. You know, I don't want to talk about that. It might just be the sample of authors that maybe within that no one felt like they were fitting that category. But I know that it's not actually a gender issue because just people have anxiety. You know, it doesn't matter. But it's just how comfortable you feel talking about it, I think. And it is really worrying that some people don't feel comfortable, and it can then lead to really bad issues, I guess.
And we've discussed how damaging being isolated like that can be. So I'm sorry that you've had to face such losses. So I hope that things improve and that we can see less of that, both personally and as a society.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important to talk about it, isn't it? So
yeah, really. Jasmine?
Yeah, I personally am gender fluid, and it's kind of weird talking about the way my gender fluidity breaks down, but I am a man in addition to a woman and an androgen. So there are men who experience anxiety for sure. But I think it kind of going off Nicole's point even about how anxiety affects people of color differently and kind of manifests differently in people of color versus white people. There's a similar kind of divide among the genders, not just the expectation of who's allowed to have anxiety, because it seems very much that, at least in the US, the perception of anxiety is that it's very much a white lady mental illness. And also that white ladies kind of just are like, the sitcom stereotype of a neurotic, 30-something white lady. And that kind of, I think, the assumption that anxiety is for white women and that all white women are kind of anxious by default makes it in some ways a little easier for white women to have visibility in these conversations, I think. But for men, that kind of preconceived notion of a man with anxiety doesn't really exist in media in the same way. And I think for a lot of men, they aren't going to necessarily recognize what anxiety feels like because they don't see that representation of their experiences in the media. So they're not necessarily going to self-identify their experiences as anxiety. And even if they go in for medical attention for their experiences, even their doctors might not define it as anxiety because these conceptions of who has what mental illnesses just run so deep in our society.
You bring up a very excellent point regarding representation and the way we use representation to identify our own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So I can only agree wholeheartedly that that's definitely a problem. When you feel something is wrong, but you don't have the words for it, how do you get help?
Exactly.
It's definitely much easier when you fit those preconceived categories to go, oh, that might be me. But without that, you don't have enough road signs to do it. So I definitely agree that that's an issue. Mary?
Yeah, I just want to say that, yeah, I mean, the patriarchy hurts everybody. And living in a very rural area with very specific visions of masculinity in this very rural area, the patriarchy hurts everybody. And there is a stigma. My husband identifies as a cis man and he has anxiety. So yeah, I mean, it is out there. It does exist in the wild. David Attenborough can, see it in his binoculars and do the documentary on it. But it affects everybody. And I think it's important for us. I'm so glad that was mentioned. And thank you for having us talk about that. Because I think it's so important to talk about, not just, men with anxiety, but, people of color. Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, to bring up, trauma-informed discussions about anxiety and mental health, because everybody deserve to be seen. Everybody needs to be seen.
Especially in your specific circumstance where those kinds of issues are like even made more obvious. I'm glad you were able to use your personal experience to reference that. There's certain situations, rural people who definitely have like at least a slightly different idea of the way masculinity and femininity works versus the way many different like cultures of people might see those things, the way they can be open talking about them. All of these have different and varied challenges to face when it comes to seeking care. So I appreciate you being able to bring that up. We are just about at time. So the last question I have for everyone is anything that you would like to say, any goodbyes, anything like that. We'll go through everybody and you can say all your stuff. But I personally wanted to thank all of you guys for being just the most excellent panel. I've had a really good time. And thank you to Diana and Weeknight Writers for hosting this. And we'll start with Mary.
I just, again, thank you to Diana for hosting this. You guys, I feel like I've met a group of new friends, and so I'm very glad I, took the time to do this. And I also want to let people know, I will go into the Discord and post my links and stuff. My door virtually is always open. I do a lot of disability and mental health type advocacy. And if you need a shoulder, please feel free to reach out in any way that you may want to, because nobody should feel alone.
That's a very kind offer. Jasmine?
Yeah, I also want to thank Diana for organizing this whole thing. It looks like so far it's going really well, so I'm excited about that. And I'll also post some of my stuff in the Discord, my links, etc. And thank you to everyone who stopped by, and especially to my fellow Pacific Coast people who woke up early for this.
Caroline?
Yeah, I just wanted to say as well, thank you to Diana, thank you to everyone else here. Sorry for being late, but unfortunately one of my anxiety helps is my dogs. It's also can be difficult to wrangle. So they're away now, they're happy. But yeah, and also just for anyone that is kind of listening to this and is in the same boat as all of us, I guess, just make your mental health a priority and try to kind of believe that you're worth it, and yeah, get some help, have even just friends. It'll be really worth it, and it'll help a lot.
That's a good and important thing to remember, the trying to think that you're worth the help.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be a struggle, but like it's really the first step. Nicole?
Yeah, just, thank you everyone for being here. And I'm just, I'm really excited that this is happening, this panel and this conference, and that, destigmatizing mental illness is super important. And thanks to everyone for, doing that work.
Awesome. So we're going to call it here. I don't know if Diana's going to end this. But that is it